Good morning, students. How are you doing? I hope you are all fine. In today's lesson, I am going to talk about the second short story, The Happy Prince, which is written by Oscar Wilde. But before that, I would like to talk about Oscar Wilde's life and work. Oscar Wilde was born in Dublin, Ireland, and educated at both Trinity College, Dublin and Oxford. His mother, Jane Wilde, was a poet who wrote under the name Speranza, and his father, Sir William Wilde, was a surgeon. Wilde was known for his dedication to the aesthetic movement, having published papers on aesthetic morality as early as 1874. He lauded decadence and the value of art for its own sake, a theme that recurred in his plays and fiction. However, Wilde also identified as a socialist and published an essay called The Soul of Man under Socialism, outlining his beliefs. Wilde married Constance Lloyd in 1884, whose annual allowance helped fund his luxurious style of living. The couple had 2 sons together, but their relationship was rocked by Wilde beginning to undertake homosexual relationship with other men, beginning with the journalist and art critic Robert Ross. Allusions both subtle and explicit to homosexuality began to recur in Wilde's works. Whole sections of his fiction, The Picture of Dorian Gray, were censored prior to publication due to their scandalous content, and reviewers still describe the finished book as excessively decadent and even unclean. Ultimately, Wilde was put on trial in 1895 for gross indecency after his conviction. He served 2 years in prison before moving into exile in France, where he ultimately passed away at the age of 64. Now let's move to the introduction of The Happy Prince. Actually, the peak of Wilde's literary career, as well as the trial and death, coincided with the final years of the Victorian period. Victorian England saw radical and drastic changes in many areas, from technological developments to scientific discoveries and shifts in social norms. Actually, in the final years of the Victorian era, especially in England, there were changes, big changes, radical and drastic changes in technological development to scientific discoveries and shifts in social norms. For example, Charles Darwin published his findings on evolution on the origin of species in the middle of the century, around the same time that Karl Marx published the Communist Manifesto and Capital in Germany. These texts, among other developments in philosophy, rocked, destroyed the established norms in Western Europe, prompting revolutions against inequality as well as atheistic movements. The London Underground was built in the 1850s, along with the first telegraph system, drastically accelerating the movement of goods, people, and information. Actually, Wilde was born into this world, the world of transition from the Victorian era to modernism. The Victorians were known for strict social norms, from the temperance movement to devout anti-sodomy laws and the medical insistence on female hysteria. Although Wilde and his friend group paved the way for the loosening and shifting of social values that really blossomed in the interwar period, the 1920s and 1930s. He passed away in exile without truly witnessing these changes. Wilde drew inspiration for The Happy Prince in part from the fairy tales of Hans Christian Andersen, which function both as forms of social criticism and stories for children. Actually, the function of the fairy tales is as forms of social criticism and stories for children. The genre of children's literature began during the Victorian period in England around the time of Wilde's birth, with the publication of novels like Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll and Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. Another contemporary would be Rudyard Kipling, whose stories and verses for children, including The Jungle Book, contain stories with deeper themes such as abandonment or freedom. Now, let's talk about the summary of The Happy Prince. The Happy Prince is a story about the statue of the Happy Prince and the swallow or sparrow. This is a story about the statue of a happy prince and a little swallow. The Happy Prince was a beautiful statue, stood on a tall column high above the city. The statue was covered with thin leaves of gold. He had sapphires for his eyes and a ruby in his sword. One night, a little swallow flew over the city. He was tired and wanted to spend the night between the feet of the Happy Prince. As he was ready to sleep, just then a large drop of water fell on him. It was curious, as there were no clouds in the sky. Then another drop of water fell on him. The swallow decided to look for another place. Just then, third drop fell on him. He looked up and saw that these were the tears from the eyes of the Happy Prince, and the swallow filled with pity. The swallow asked, "Who are you, and why are you crying?" The Happy Prince told the swallow that he lived in a palace while he was alive and had a kind human heart. There was no sorrow at all, and his courtiers called him the Happy Prince. After his death, he had been set up on a high pillar. His heart is made of lead, and it always weeps when he sees the ugliness and misery of his city. He told the swallow that far away in a little street a little boy of a seamstress is sick. He is crying, and his mother could not give him oranges to eat. He asked the swallow to give his ruby to the poor woman when he is going to Egypt. He obeyed the Happy Prince, and then he flew and laid the ruby on the table of the poor woman. Then the Happy Prince saw a writer. He was suffering from cold and hunger. Happy Prince asked the swallow to give one of the sapphires to the writer. The swallow did not want to pluck out the sapphire from his eyes, but he obeyed him unwillingly. After that, the Happy Prince saw a March girl and her matches fall into the gutter. At his command, the swallow very unwillingly plucked out the sapphire from the other eye of the Happy Prince, and now the prince was totally blind. The swallow slipped the sapphire into the palm of the March girl. Then the Happy Prince allowed the swallow to fly away to Egypt, but the swallow decided to stay with the blind prince forever. The swallow reported about the sufferings of the starving people. At the command of the Happy Prince, the swallow took off the golden leaves from the statue and distributed them among the poor people. Now the statue was dull and gray. The frost made the swallow colder and colder, and he was about to die. He flew to the Happy Prince, and the two exchanged a kiss. The swallow fell down dead at the feet of the statue. The lead heart of the Happy Prince broke into two. Later, the mayor and town councillors walked by the statue. Distributed by its shabbiness, they decided to have it melted and remade. Since The lead heart did not melt, however, it was thrown away on a dust heap with the swallow's body. God asked one of his angels to bring the two most precious things in the city, which turned out to be the corpse and the broken heart. The corpse of the swallow, actually, and broken heart. God promised an eternity in paradise in exchange for the brave sacrifices of the prince and the swallow. Thanks a lot.